Can everybody hear me? Yes. Typically don't like to hold the microphone, but if we have to do the Frank Sinatra, I will. Again, my name is Matt Sargent. I work for Marathon Consulting. My duties there are generally project management, some requirements, and that sort of thing. Not a whole lot of coding. So I have some hobbies, which pretty much are coding and scripting and playing with small computers. So that's what kind of led me to this. What I wanted to tell you about today is a project I've been working on for about a year, and it has to do with my brother-in-law's family bought an island in Canada about, well, 30 years ago, 1980. It was an old fishing camp. And they've been going to it since then, sort of improving it, fishing, having a good time, and I thought they needed to have a little more modern communications at that island. So I got the idea that I would put in a weather station, and I just wanted to be able to send that weather data up to the weather underground like I do from home. From that sort of small idea, things got a little overboard, as you'll see. Where is this island? If you can see from this map, it's about an 18-hour drive. Takes us 2 days, usually overnight somewhere in Canada, across the border, usually Barrie or something like that. And then in the morning, we drive the rest of the way, stop for groceries, and take the boat to the island. The boat ride is about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how much people and stuff we have on the boat. So it's out there. The boat track we take is the dotted line, as you can see. We kind of take the protected route. And this island is absolutely one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And we've been going there for years, and but it is very remote. There are no services. And as you can see from that picture, in this movie, hopefully this movie will play. A little jerky, sorry about that. It was recorded at 4K from my drone, so we'll just skip on to that. This is the actual island right here in the foreground. The red arrow points to the island. It's about an acre altogether, but it has lots of outbuildings. As I mentioned, it used to be a fishing camp when they bought it, and it was the agreement that they would not run it as a fishing camp, but as a family camp to reduce competition on the fishing in that area. So why connect to this island? Why do this project at all? And there's a number of reasons to do it. One, it sounded like an interesting project for me, and I thought I could do some technical stuff and be a hero. So one of the big things is it's really remote. You take everything with you, and if you did not bring it with you, you are SOL. You do not have it. If it's not on the island and you didn't bring it, next trip, because it's literally 9 hours from anywhere, really. The island is mostly unoccupied. They're all during the winter. There's nobody on it. And during the summer, when no one's visiting at that particular week, during vacations, it's unoccupied. Yet there's a lot of systems that have to run on the island, the solar system, the battery, some of the refrigerators continue to run, the freezer mainly, not the refrigerators run. So there's a lot of systems that you would want to know if there was a problem with them before you headed up to the island. So that's where the preparation part of it comes. You want to be prepared when you go. If you need to bring a part, if you think, oh my goodness, our batteries are done, we need to buy a new set of batteries. It would be good to know that before you go and not spend a week of having to run the generator continuously or something like that. And the last thing was just sort of an afterthought, security on the island. It's funny, on this island, they pretty much leave the main cabin open and a half a bottle of really, really bad liquor in the cabin. So if anybody gets caught out on the ice up there, or they're hunting and need a place to overnight, they don't have to break the door down to get in, and they think they found, the liquor, which they have not. So there is more liquor there. So the first question about this whole thing when I started was, how should I connect? We could go cellular, but cellular is pretty far. It's 16 miles to the nearest cellular tower. We could go satellite, and for the kind of things we're doing, satellite would work, because satellite has very high latency, because you have to send the signal to the geosynchronous orbit and back down again. That's a long latency. You can't game, but sending data from a weather system, from a solar system, from a variety of systems would be fine. But it's very expensive. but you can put it almost anywhere on the planet. And the last one was Iridium. That's another one we toyed with because we thought about doing short messages, sort of packing that weather data into very small messages and sending them. But it ends up being, you really can't do anything else besides broadcast some information. So cellular was the choice. So I went with cellular, and that little white thing you see here, which actually I have one of them here. It's basically what's called a wingle. And it's made by Hawaii, which is a Chinese company, and it's a pretty cool little thing because the USB creates an Ethernet port on a Raspberry Pi or any other type of computer that can understand it, and it also sets up a Wi-Fi network that you can connect to, all the while connecting to the cellular link. The issue with the cellular is being 16 miles away, the antennas in this thing aren't going to cut it. So you typically have to have a directional antenna. We'll talk about that in a second. The other thing that was really important about this is cost. You know, cellular communications can be quite expensive. I was lucky, my son is a T-Mobile customer, and I happened into the T-Mobile, and they said, oh yeah, we have a deal, you can get 2 gigs of LTE data, and then we back it down to 3G or 2G speeds after 2 gigs, all for $15 a month, you know, if you just put it on your son's account. And I was like, sold, because you also get free roaming in Canada. So for $15 a month, I get basically unlimited data to the island. I typically don't use more than 2 gigs a month, but it's nice to have that padding in case, you know, something went awry and it doesn't, you know, cost me $800 one month. The directional antenna was pretty important. This is what's called a wideband directional log periodic table. It's pretty inexpensive. It costs $30, but it does the job. You have to get it pointed right at the cellular tower, and it does the 16 miles. It doesn't do it with a ton of power, but we'll get to that later. The speed, it's anywhere from 5 to 1 megabits down, and anywhere from 0.1 to 1.2 megabits up. I actually made this slide when we were connected to the Rogers network up there. It's one of the other cellular. I'm currently, when I was connected to Bell, I'm currently connected to Rogers, giving me a 4G link where I'm getting 10 megabits down and 5 megabits up, which is just totally unheard of. Of course, there's no one else up there using the cellular because nobody's there. It's freezing. So this picture shows in the lower foreground the antennas pointing in the direction of Killarney, which again, I'll show you this picture again, is 16 miles away. So it's a long shot. It's mostly over water. It does pretty well. Just to give you an idea, 16 miles from where we're standing right now is almost to the ocean front of Virginia Beach. You could never do that here. We have too much electromagnetic radiation, too much stuff in there. It's just never going to go that far. But it's good to see that, you know, 16 miles is actually pretty darn far. So this is another movie. This one is designed to make you nauseous. It is basically showing you the different parts that I have going on there. You've got the solar panels. You have an anemometer spinning, and those are the 2 antennas. And it's on a ham radio tower they put up years ago, and there's Tom walking up the walkway. So I don't know how jerky it is. Yeah, that makes me busy every time. So so that was sort of, okay, that's how I'm going to do it. So let's talk about the equipment that we would want to put up there. As I mentioned before, we had a weather station. So in the intervening years the intervening year between me putting in the weather station or deciding I'm going to put the weather station in, it was clear that we needed to put a new solar system in. And since I was the major complainer about how poorly designed the old solar system was, I got the job of picking out the new solar system and contracting to have it installed. Unfortunately, the installer called about 2 weeks before we were going up for the install trip and said, I can't install it. And I was like, what are we going to do? Luckily, my brother-in-law and his friend were able to climb on the roof, melt the soles off of their shoes, and install those panels. And then we installed the solar controller in the box with the batteries and everything. So that worked out really well, and we have a ton of power now. So that's good. So with that new solar system, it has the ability to send data up to the cloud so you can monitor what kind of performance you're getting, the batteries, the battery level, the usage, all of that. So that was one of the other things, like, oh, hey, let's not just send the weather data, let's send this data about the solar system. So this is the box in which I put most of the components, and so I'm going to describe some of those. This first thing at the top here is not the first thing that comes in, but it is an important one. The system runs on a 24-volt battery system. So we needed 24 to 5 volts, and that's what that box does. This is what's called a low voltage disconnect, and that is if the battery pack drops too low, we don't want to continue to use power out of it. We want to limit the amount of power. This basically will cut off at 22.8 volts, and it'll come back on at 24.5 or something like that. And that basically says, don't keep running this system if the batteries are really in trouble, because the more you use them, the more you don't want to really kill them, because they're very expensive. It costs about $4,000 to put a new battery set in. I wanted to put a camera connected to the Raspberry Pi. Next thing I'm going to show you is a Raspberry Pi, but I wanted to put a camera in there. If anybody of you guys have worked with a Raspberry Pi camera, you know that the cable is very thin. Well, these guys in, I don't know where it was, maybe it was in the Czech Republic, make this little converter box where you can take that little thin cable and turn it into HDMI. I thought that's perfect because I can run HDMI outside the box. And it just turns it back into the cable. And then the last thing is the Raspberry Pi. I actually have the modem connected to that. It also has a radio that connects to the weather station that gathers the data for the weather. And then there's a thing on the Raspberry Pi called a Widdy Pi Mini. That is basically a real-time clock. It's a board, has a real-time clock in it, has the ability to wake up and put the Raspberry Pi to sleep. And that thing has saved me because there is nobody to push the button to restart up that computer. So if inadvertently you meant to do a reboot and you did a shutdown, no one could start that because there's nobody there to punch the button. But if you have a Widdy Pi and you said, hey, if I do something as stupid as that, wake me up tomorrow at 5 p.m., that saved you. So that's what saved me, is that. It woke it up at 5 the next day, and I'm telling you, at 4:55, I was like this. Because, you know, it's not even gotten the bad weather, and it was sort of going to be like a wah-wah, so. The last thing is there's a USB radio that connects to the La Crosse weather station. So the Raspberry Pi camera, I made my own case. It has a little desiccant pack, and I just basically put it in a plastic box, and I pointed it, and the whole point of pointing it, as you can see, there's the HDMI camera, and the whole point of this camera is to look at the solar panels. And I know this is not a great angle of the cabin. It actually looks nicer. It's kind of a bad angle, but the solar panels are on top there. It's not a great angle, and in a little while I'll show you some pictures with a bunch of snow piled on those. So that's the main reason, was to see how much snow was going to be on those. So the software I cobbled together, and I don't know, how many of you guys have worked with Raspberry Pi or BeagleBone Black or any of those? So these are great environments. I don't have to tell any of you guys, but those of you guys that haven't used it, it's an open source, Linux-based, single board computer, and there are tons of libraries. Basically, everybody probably has done what you're trying to do, and in my case, trying to log on to that Hawaii dongle and get data about the dongle. In other words, how strong is the connection, and you have the ability to send SMS messages and receive them with that dongle, but you need an interface to log into its little website and get that data. So somebody wrote a library to do that. It wasn't perfect. It was written for a slightly different dongle. I needed to change it a little bit, worked with that guy and was able to do that. And I wrote an SMS interface so that I could actually send text messages to the dongle and have it do things for me. So if you'll pardon me one sec, we'll switch to that really quick, and we will send the island a message. If I send it anything besides the word weather, it'll say, hi from Beaverstone Bay, ask me about the weather. So I'm just going to ask it about the weather. I'm sorry? It is. They might, and I was going to bring that up. They can limit you based on like that they're seeing what you're using. That is a new policy they put in. I think we're actually grandfathered in, but like you say, I do have a backup plan, and that is to actually hire Canadian Wireless and pay them the $30 a month. So I just asked it about the weather, and look, we got a response. Awesome. It's alive. My baby. It's currently 34 degrees. So while we have this up there, I will show you the other things just now. And right now, that is the data that we get into the cloud about the solar system. That is when there's absolutely no light getting to the panels. I will show you what it's supposed to look like. That's when it's getting a ton of power. This is when the blue lines are watts and watts of power, like 230 watts right now. And mind you, the system we put in can push about 1,300 watts in full sunlight if it needs to, but the solar charging system knows to, hey, I don't need that many watts to charge the battery, so it'll dumb it down to 230 watts, even though it had plenty more to use. It just doesn't have anywhere to put it. So that's what's going on with that. I will also show you that since we were talking about that Raspberry Pi camera, this is the view of the camera right now when I took a picture a few minutes ago. So we have about 2 feet of snow on top of the panels. So until that snow melts, we're probably not going to get any more electricity. So I'm going to switch back to the presentation now. Everybody good? Back to this. Okay. Sorry? Yeah, we'll talk about that at the end. We have some ideas. We have some ideas. The island has a Twitter account. It's called Glazer Island. Feel free to follow Glazer Island. It updates you with the weather on the island, 5 o'clock every evening, and every once in a while it will tweet out a picture of the snow around the island. I was able to write an integration or use an integration to Dropbox, and that's when I give it a command. I didn't really tell the truth. Can't just send it a weather word. I can send it a command and tell it to take a picture. And it will take that picture, and then instead of having me log in and try to go get that picture, it actually just uploads it to Dropbox for me. I also have it upload the picture every day at noon to Dropbox, so that I have a picture every day as it goes forward. And we can look for that in a minute. I think I'm running a little bit late, so we'll get going. WEEWX, X is basically an interface to weather systems. It's awesome. It's a great piece of Python software. It allows you to push weather data to the Weather Underground, to the CWOP, all of those different weather resources. Let's see, I think I have a picture. One of the other things, oh yeah, and then Real VNC. This was actually late to the game for me. I mean, I've known about VNC for a long time, but I didn't realize that they formed a company, Real VNC, and it's installed on all the Raspberry Pis. And you can actually sign up for a free cloud account. You can get up to 5 computers, I think, and 3 users. It's totally free. It works absolutely perfectly. I can log on to the desktop, and there's almost no latency. It's literally the coolest thing. Originally, what I wrote was an SMS message I would send so that the computer up on the island would create a VPN tunnel all the way back to my router at home. Then I would log into my router and I could go in the back door. Because when you're trying to, you can't open a port coming through cellular unless you pay for that kind of cellular service. So it's like brick wall, can't get through. But I knew I needed to, but VNC does it. It has servers, and basically every once in a while your computer's pinging up the servers, you connect to the things, and it makes a connection. Works perfectly. So this is the solar controller panel, and it only has an Ethernet cable, so I had to buy a little wireless router to connect it. This is, I think it was $14. Again, one of those things where I saved money at the wrong time, and we'll talk about that in a little while. So yeah, that's the Midnight Solar. That's the $14 travel router. I also have, we decided to put a camera in at the last minute. If you'll notice, it looks like a Minion. I have another one. Basically, it has a PIR sensor, so it only records when it senses heat. That makes life a lot easier because it doesn't use the battery-powered camera. So this is the pictures from that camera. I have it hung down at the docks so we could see if anybody comes, and also we wanted to see what's going to happen with the ice and whatnot down the docks. And actually, people did come to the docks. There's some hunters that came on the island, and then they were just hanging around. And they stayed about 20 minutes or so, and we got it all on the camera. I don't even think they noticed the camera. What's that? Yeah. Well, we knew that people come. You know, it is a pretty small community up there. People know, and we don't think, nobody's ever done damage before, but they typically will come, and if, you know, it looked like they were loading their shotguns, so I think they were actually looking for birds. So that's pretty much it. So we're going to go right into lessons learned. And I'm running a little bit late, so I'll get it on. So I titled this slide, "The Space Station, or Very Nearly." And the reason is we actually call the island the space station because of that whole thing about if something breaks up there, the generator fails, it's not, let's go to Home Depot and get the part, because it's 9 hours away. So everything, you kind of have to be prepared for everything. We have a lot of equipment up there. We have the ability to actually do stuff. I always think that maybe I should bring up my 3D printer so we could print anything that we couldn't figure out how to make. But one of the things I learned is loosely coupled systems, right? That's what we should have. And I made a critical error. This is why it's a lessons learned, because it did it wrong. The cellular modem can just be powered from power. It doesn't need to be connected to the Raspberry Pi. I thought it would be cool to hook it to the Raspberry Pi because, you know, hey, turn off the Raspberry Pi, cellular modem stops, bring up the Raspberry Pi, cellular modem comes up. The critical problem with that is if the Raspberry Pi goes down, everything goes down. That's it. There's no more communications to the island. So the fix to that is just to plug that cellular modem in on its own power supply and let the Raspberry Pi connect to it wirelessly, okay? The other one was redundancy. This is my niece, and if you can see, she's holding a pike that she caught, and we've got a little redundance help there with her, her cousin who's helping hold that pike. And this is one of those things I was talking about. I've got a single Pi up there, Raspberry Pi running. If fails, the weather data stops, and the Pi camera stops working. So why didn't I just buy another one? They're $35, Matt, you know? That's probably what I should have spent the money on. So I get another one, set up a redundancy. The other one was automated monitoring, and this is something that people that do this kind of software know all the time. If you're running something that needs to stay up all the time and you put in a system that checks it and says, are you up, are you up, are you up? And if you're not, then I'm going to pull your power out and I'm going to start you back up again. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to pull your power and I'm going to start up the spare. I could have done that stuff. I did not. An Arduino is a good solution for that solution because an Arduino has just firmware. Raspberry Pis write and read off an SD card that can wear out, and so you can run into some problems with that. Okay, so this is the last one, and it's a little bit funny. You should conduct a test that's exactly like what you're going to do when you deploy it, because you may deploy your router with a switch in the wrong position. This switch puts this router in WISP mode, which is great if you're like using this thing at a hotel and you don't want other people getting into the devices you connect to this. This is not a good thing if you are hooking it up on an island and you want to get to those devices because it puts a firewall in and doesn't let you through. If I had that switch in the other position, all would be right with the world. But there is literally nobody that can flip that switch. So I should have done a bit more of a formal real-world test. So real quick, what's next? I'm working on a plan to do an auto start for the generator. The solar system can tell me that the batteries are low and the generator needs to start, so I'm going to write they're going to buy a really nice Honda generator, a new one, and that one has an interface for doing an auto start, but you have to write it yourself. The other one is to get better Wi-Fi coverage. Like I said, I bought that $14 router. The signal down to the camera is really poor. I could have just bought a $25 one, and everything would have been good. So I'll get a better one. And the water pump is the single biggest user of power on the island. We probably ought to monitor how long it's running when it's pumping, when it's filling the storage tank. If it runs a lot longer than normal, someone needs to know the next time they go to the island so they can clear the filter. And that's it. Questions?